you know why you're here. Today we are painting these disco ball grapes that I initially had made in my sketchbook, and you guys voted on Instagram to turn this into a full tutorial. So let's get into the supplies that you'll need for today's painting. For paper, I used Canson's mixed media paper. This is 120 pounds, which is not too thick, but pretty thick, and it did really well with the water, paints, and colored pencils that I used. For brushes, I used a round brush, a square brush, and a liner brush. I did have a fourth brush that I thought I was going to use, but I ended up actually not needing it. And then for paints, I had a white, a lightish green kind of color, a little on the warmer side, a medium green color, and then a darker green color, particularly one that was a little more on the warm yellowy side, and then some brown. I didn't need the brown for very long. I just used it to paint in the branch or the stem that the grapes were on. And then of course you're going to need a palette. I just use glass plates as my palettes, and whenever I'm ready to start painting, I just clean a spot on the plate and call it good. And then of course you could also use pencils, erasers, things like that. You're going to need that for drawing and sketching out the grapes. And another item you could use but you do not need is a white Posca marker. I used it just because I had it, but if I hadn't had this product, I would have just watered down some white paint for this step and would have been just fine. And lastly, you're going to be needing a white colored pencil. I guess this step's not totally necessary. You could decide for yourself when we get there, but I thought it was very helpful to have a white colored pencil. It does not need to be Prismacolor. Crayola works just fine. Okay, so now that we've got materials out of the way, let's actually get started. I'm not going to talk too much about the sketching phase, but this reference photo is in the description if you want to use it as well. I got it on Pinterest. It's just a photo of grapes. Any photo of grapes I think will do, or if you wanted to, you could try another fruit. One thing I will say though is that if you struggle with proportion, then maybe consider starting in the middle of the drawing versus at the top. This could help you gauge a little bit better where to place the grapes, how big to make the grapes or how small to make them, and make sure that you're filling up the page properly. For example, I started at the top initially and my grapes were too small, so I had to erase and start over. While I'm doing this portion of the drawing too, I like to overlap my circles rather than trying to draw the lines perfectly as I see them. This just helps me ensure that the grapes are even in size and not lopsided or wobbly looking. And I don't really worry about erasing the lines too much. I just decide which grapes are going to go in front later because the gouache paint will cover it up anyways. Okay, so how I started this painting was just identifying which grapes were in front and which grapes were behind those front grapes. I just differentiated them by doing a lighter and a warmer green. The lighter green was for the grapes that were in front. Darker green was for the grapes that were in the back. Pretty straightforward. And I did this with some gouache that was very watered down, almost like watercolor. I did not want this to be too thick of paint. We want to work in layers with this painting. That's what's going to give us the best outcome. So you just want to really water down your paint. That's what I did on my plate, and paint in your grapes. And I apologize, guys, if my voice sounds a little weird. I'm trying very hard to sound normal, but I've got a bit of a cold right now. My voice is so scratchy and I'm coughing a ton. So sorry if it just sounds a little off. And then I did go in with a thin layer of brown just to paint in the stems. Okay, so now we are going to get that white colored pencil and we're going to be using this to draw the mirrors onto our grapes, the little disco ball mirrors. This step is not absolutely necessary. You can skip to step 3 if you feel like you're able to do that. But for me, it helped me keep the placement of the mirrors organized and consistent. So I highly recommend you do this step. You don't need a fancy colored pencil. Crayola would work just fine. It's mostly going to get covered up later anyways. Now, when drawing these mirrors on the disco ball or on the grapes, if you will, don't think of it as something that should be randomly placed, kind of like bricks on a building. It's actually going to be uniform. They're going to be like in a line vertically and horizontally. So we need to keep that in mind when we're drawing our lines, and that actually makes it a little bit easier for us. I found it helpful to think of it like I was drawing the contour line of each grape. If you understand this concept already, feel free to skip to the next chapter. But for the rest of you, when you draw a contour of something, you're basically imagining what it would be like to run your finger along that item. And the line that you trace with your finger is what you are drawing. Like the line that your finger made is literally the line you're going to draw, if that makes sense. So in this case of grapes, it's going to curve, both vertically and horizontally. So your lines should reflect that. You also have to take into consideration the perspective in which you're seeing the grape to help determine which direction the lines are going to curve. They may curve a little more to the left or to the right. Good rule of thumb for this one is whatever direction, like whatever side of the grape you're on, say you're on the left, most likely those lines are going to curve to the left. If you're on the right, they're going to curve to the right. Sometimes it's more nuanced than that, but that's a good place to start. It may be a good idea to start doing this in your sketchbook first before working on your final painting if you're not so confident or familiar with contour lines, because getting these lines right will make a huge difference in the outcome of your painting. So I think it's worth taking the time to get it right. So now we are on to the fun part of the painting of the little mirrors. This process is definitely going to be a feel it out as you go kind of thing, but I do have a few tips for you guys. First, pick a light source. I decided that the light would be coming from the left, so I started with a very light green color, almost white. I actually mixed some white into my lightest green just to make it even brighter, and I started painting those squares on the left. It's okay to have two of the same color next to each other, but make sure to break it up a little bit with the other shades later on. Now I'm going in with a medium green color, and I'm starting to paint some of those squares mostly in the center. You can also leave some squares blank or with the background color that you already put in to add a fourth variation of color. Lastly, as I'm sure you expected, I'm going in with a darker green for the final color. This color I focused on the opposite side of my light source, but of course I let it spill into the other areas as well. The nice thing about gouache is if you decide that you don't like a color in a certain square, you can let it dry and then always cover it up later. This process is a little bit tedious and a little slow, so I recommend you just put on your favorite music and enjoy the process. There's really no cheat to make it go faster, so just enjoy it. You may also notice that the squares are not perfectly painted with sharp edges, and this was actually done on purpose. After looking more closely at how a disco ball reflects light, I noticed that not all of them have a perfect single shade in each mirror. This can be more easily seen if you take a photo of a disco ball, but doing this will mean that I will ultimately end up with some squares that have 2 or even 3 shades on the same mirror, and once we add the dividing lines at the end, it'll all start to kind of make sense. Okay, it is finally time to break out that Posca marker, and if you don't have a Posca marker, remember it is totally fine just to use some watered down acrylic paint that will do the job just fine, and a fine liner brush. While painting these lines, I want you to remember to follow the guide of the colored pencil lines you made earlier and try not to get tricked into outlining the new shapes that you may have created with your paint. You want to make sure that these lines are the contour of the grape and they are uniform, because when we do that, we're going to get 1 or 2 or even 3 colors in one mirror square sometimes, and that's going to give us that more realistic disco ball effect that we're looking for. As you continue to outline more and more grapes, it's going to start feeling really reflective. The light's going to look really bright, and I actually felt like near the end of the painting, this actually looked like it was starting to sparkle. Okay guys, we finally made it to the end. All that's left to do is erase your pencil lines and you have a disco ball grape painting. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps me so much more than you know, and it also lets me know which kinds of videos you want to see. If you want to learn more about gouache or just enjoy gouache painting videos, be sure to check out this one where I give my review on the Himi gouache paints that I used today, or this one where I talk about trusting the process when painting with gouache. Okay, have a good day. Bye!